why should we care about the impact of being sustainable with our events? Does anyone want to kick it off? Okay,
I
go
can
ahead,
start
Liz.
off.
We'll do Anastasia and then Shane, you'll jump in.
All right.
All right, well, for the bigger picture, we do not live in an infinite world. I just read today that there are 8 billion people on the planet. A couple of years ago, there were only 6 billion people. And we don't have infinite resources. And more people want more and more things and want to live like Americans do. And the truth is, none of us should live like Americans do. We shouldn't treat the world like it's a single-use world because it's the only world we have.
Thanks, Anastasia. Go ahead, Shane. What's your take?
Absolutely. So building off of you, Anastasia, I agree. We live in a closed loop system, so we got to use our resources efficiently. In the same vein, we have 8 billion people on this planet. I think we could have 8 billion more. We just got to use our resources more efficiently. There's a biological carrying capacity of every ecosystem. I think the biological carrying capacity of our planet is much larger, but we just need to use our resources more efficiently. And lastly, I want to say at our events, if you people are sitting here on the Zoom call or you're sitting here in the Octagon, it means you are leaders, right? It means you're taking charge and you're going to take the initiative to make an impact on this planet. So it's up to us and you to make changes, and then we can create more change through the butterfly effect, where you teach one person, then they teach someone else, and so on and so on and so on. So use this opportunity to implement events into your leadership careers. So thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you, Shane. I think part of our conversation today will really evolve around resources and what we're using at the start of events and how that impacts on the back end of where those resources are come from and where they're going. So that's what I hope some of you will take away from today. Sarah or Liz, anyone, do either of you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll go. I come from the event industry. I tend to focus on big mega events, but I think events, generally speaking, they bring people together. Hopefully it's for a good reason. It's a baby shower, or it's a big conference, or whatever it may be. It's a reason for us to come together, and I just think it's an opportunity for us, as Shane said, leaders in kind of the sustainability world, to bring forward our message of we only have one planet. There is no planet B. And this is our opportunity to kind of share our message, as well as kind of make that event more sustainable. Events inherently are such, they are leaders in waste, they are leaders in emissions, and these are all things that we can help to offset and help to neutralize through intentional planning of our events.
Awesome, and I just want to add to all of that, because what I was going to say is pretty much what all of you already pointed out, but being here at this event, most likely a lot of you are already passionate about lowering your impact on climate change and are aware of what's going on in regards to our planet, but I think events don't get put to the forefront of that. And like Sarah said, they are increasing always as one of the largest emitters. So even if we take potential travel out of the equation, which is one of the largest impacts of the event industry, we're still, the waste production and the energy usage associated with events are astronomical, and I know that we'll get into a lot of that today. So the reason that you should care is that as event organizers, as event attendees, we have this amazing opportunity and a responsibility to set an example and to lower our event's impact. So I'm very excited to share and learn some stuff myself at today's event. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Liz. I'm going to kick this next question to you and maybe Sarah also. What is the environmental impact of an in-person event anyways? I know you were talking about emissions, but are there other things that, hold on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
So, I briefly mentioned transportation. That is a really big one associated with events, and that's not even, of course, taking into account all of the emissions and the waste production and energy usage that's going on when we're executing the events, but just anything like organizers, panelists, speakers, and then attendees actually transporting to the event. So it really is thinking from start to finish, which we're excited all to hear some information about other people's takes on this, but providing information and alternatives and partnering with local transportation options like public and green options and going digital. Today's event is such an amazing example of what you can do to combine the in-person events that we all crave and we desire and are not going anywhere and we wouldn't want them to, but incorporating digital options into it to lower that impact from transportation. And I would say the next largest impacts are food waste and food production and food operations at an event. I think we can probably all realize that if we really think about what goes into that whole process. Single-use plastic, informational waste, so that's going to be flyers, plastic tchotchkes and swag that is unnecessary. So there's so much waste that's being created from large events to small events and everything in between, every style of event. And I think that virtual and digital aspect is another thing to really think about in ways to lowering your impact in your waste production at events.
Thanks, Liz. I'd like to highlight too that I think we're using glass and ceramic today, so that's a great example. And then I'll try and remind everyone at the end, but there's little succulents to take with you. So it's a plant to take with you instead of like a plastic tchotchke kind of thing. So ways to think a little more creatively with events. Sarah, is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh, Liz totally just hit it. The two highest areas where we are producing waste and producing emissions is through our transportation for events as well as through our food and beverage. If you could focus in on any one area, it would be those two areas. That's where you're going to make your biggest impact is through transportation and food and beverage. And that food and beverage is everything from where you're sourcing the food. I'm sure you guys have all seen like the examples of like maybe a fruit cup. The fruit is grown in Peru but packaged in Germany, and you're eating it here. Like that's a crazy idea. But looking at sourcing food locally, looking at also your menu development, what kind of food you're serving to your attendees also has a huge impact. And then also the afterlife of the food. There is a crazy amount of food waste that is thrown away after events. Really like in my area, we really focus on reducing that amount of food that's going into the trash or into the compost maybe, but really focusing on increasing the amount of food that's going back to human consumption. So looking at ways to donate food after an event, and that plays right into how we're developing the menus and looking at how we're serving the food, what kind of food we're serving so that we can maximize the amount of food that goes back to human consumption afterwards.
Not necessarily more is better with food, really trying to measure
Yeah.
at the start.
Exactly. And like just looking at you guys today using your China plates, like that's great. And then looking at the food that's on it, like I saw a lot of bright colors and like grains and stuff, those are all great. And then also just looking at the plate size. I don't know if you guys are feeling like you're still hungry, but you didn't have big, massive plate sizes. And that also is gonna just help with the food waste at the end.
Thank you. So this next one, maybe Shane and Anastasia would like to chime in, but where's a good place to start? What are some easy swaps you've made that we all can maybe make?
Yes, this is my favorite question, and this is literally what I deal with every day through social media and the sustainability show. So, first of all, if you guys are sitting here at this event, which we all are, that means you're already beyond the first step. Because really the first step is just following someone on social media, reading a book, watching a quick movie, something easy about sustainability, right? You want to find something fun that speaks to yourself. Maybe you want to plant a little garden, take home a succulent, put it on your desk. That's an easy way to start in the journey of sustainability. Then you can move on to more complicated stuff, which is going to be maybe taking public transit or thrifting secondhand clothing. And then the most complicated stuff, in my eyes, are offsetting your CO2 emissions. Like my debit cards are linked to an app where every time I spend money, it says how many kilograms of CO2 I emitted, and then I offset it by planting trees. And then, or investing renewably in like ESG funds or carbon neutral companies. Like money talks, especially in the capitalistic United States where we live. Money talks. Invest in companies that you care about that are good for our company, or good for our planet. So those are some easy swaps that I've made, and those are easy swaps I always tell people I meet. Go ahead, Anastasia.
So when you're planning an event, like how do you put those to work? One of the things is look at everything you're going to buy and think about it. Like, is it ever going to be reused again? A big thing that wasn't mentioned earlier is signage. there's been a go-to to do cheap vinyl signs, and vinyl is terrible for the environment at the beginning of its life and at the end of its life, but almost all banners for events are made on single-use vinyl signs. So don't use vinyl signs, figure out something else. Also like the name tags and things. If you do need to use signage, one thing to think about is this a sign that you can make, that you can use over and over and over again every year? I was just at the Cal Poly Rodeo, and they have signs all over campus for the rodeo, and there's a little strip in the middle where they've replaced the date every year, but they're using the same signs for 10 years. So think about when you make your sign, laying it out such that it can be used, if you have an annual event, that it can be used every year for the next 10 years, where only a small piece of information needs to be changed. So if you're going to make something, then you can spend a little more money, because you're like, well, this is going to be permanent. For name tags, I was at an event where you walked up and they had all these little pieces of paper. They did this at this little tiny home festival. They had cut out some of the flyers that they had passed out that hadn't gotten used. They cut them out in the shape of tiny homes, and then they had permanent markers, and you just put your own name on them, and they were already pre-stamped, and then you put them, put them on a little loop of something around your neck. I keep forgetting every time I come to events. I used to always have it in my purse to bring my own name tag. I mean, we've all been to how many events in our lives? How many laminated name tags do you have? You probably put them out, but if you have one, take it with you when you go to events. But you can make these simple swaps that are kind of fun. When somebody gets there, instead of putting a self-sticky name tag on it, if there's a piece of cardboard and a piece of hemp string, and they have to like make their own, then they start getting creative, and they can personalize it and say something about themselves on it. Does it have flowers on it? Does it have a little airplane? Whatever. So make the things reusable or compostable or recyclable and fun and part of the activity of being there.
Thanks.
Absolutely, and one little, thank you Anastasia, that was incredibly comprehensive, and that just made me think of one last little one, is that we've thrown events, and it's BYOC, bring your own cup. So a fun thing to do is like bring your own reusable bottle, or bring your own glass, and you put your name on it, you put stickers on it, and you get a cool one that speaks to you, and it's literally been a conversation starter, I can't tell you how many times. So you're right, you can make something that's more sustainable, and it also is more fun.
If I can
chime in as well, just really quick, if that's okay. In planning events, one thing that I found to be really helpful, and if you are someone that organizes events of any kind, you already are going to be looking at it from the very start of organization through the end goal. So if you kind of start to rethink when you're going through each and every aspect of your event, from choosing a venue, to signage, to promotion, to food and beverage vendors, to waste management, what waste is going to be produced at each level of that, not only from where it's coming from, to when it gets to you, to when it leaves your site. And kind of restructuring the way that you think about it, it'll give you a really great opportunity to start being creative in ways to find replacements and alternatives and set that example for your attendees. And I think not being afraid to make mistakes, doing your best not to, because we don't want to, increase our impact, but not being afraid to make mistakes and not do it right. I learn every time I do an event, I learn something new. And then I get to do it better the next time. And someone might come to me and tell me a better way to do it. So just being courageous enough to be vocal to your organization. If you have managers or something that you need to speak to about this, being courageous to step out and talk to them about ways that you can be more sustainable, and thinking of events from very start to finish and everything on either end.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, that's a really great point. I know one kind of quote that's thrown out into the community is, we don't need one or two people doing zero waste perfectly. We don't need one or two organizations doing zero waste perfectly. We all need to do a little bit and get a little better the next year and the next year, and we all need to be part of this. So I think that's something to take away too, that perfection can really be crippling, and so it's really about how can you progress to more sustainability with food, or more sustainability with transportation, or something like that, and trying to break it out like that, so it's a little bit more approachable to get started in that area. The other thing, Anastasia, when you were chatting, there were a couple ideas that came up for me locally that we've done, but I know some people are like, oh, bottles are so expensive or whatever. Mason jar and a little top here, and there's mason jars at thrift stores. So there's thrift stores, if you're having a smaller event or something like that, can be a really great resource. And then when you were talking about name tags and you were talking about vinyl signs and things like that, I think there's also a mental shift that has to happen with events. In that, oh, I can just run over to Staples and get name tags. Oh, I can just get this quickly printed, this sign, it'll be ready next week. There might need to be a little bit more time spent to think about that, or to get, papers cut out so you can do little pinned name tags instead of sticky name tags. Do you know what I'm saying with that type of thing? That some of this instant purchasing that we're all really used to, you have to change your mindset with that a bit for events. One thing EcoSlow did with some of our signage is a local artist was willing to upcycle some lawn signs, spray over them, and put our logo on them. So it was great because something wasn't going into the landfill, and we were supporting and able to, support a local artist, and that's bringing it more local. Being able to reuse something, even, so things like that. There takes some creativity, which can be fun, but as you know, with planning events, when you're brainstorming anything with events, it can take a lot of time. So you might just need to start a little bit sooner to implement some of these from the get-go. Does that sound kind of right with what you all experience?
Just piggybacking off of that really quickly is also not being afraid to kind of change the norm and think outside the box. Do I really need this? Like if my event doesn't have name tags, if I can't find an alternative, in time for my event, if I don't have name tags, is that going to be okay? I don't know the last time that I went to an event where there were name tags and I'm actually looking at them or utilizing them to learn someone's name. I introduce myself and they introduce themselves to me. Thinking about these pieces, like, is it just like we are trying to change our individual lives and sustainability, and using that question, do I really need it, to kind of change that behavior about our personal purchasing? We can also apply that to when we're planning an event. Do I really need it? And you might not even need to find an alternative for some of these things.
Next question, I'm going to switch it up a little bit, but what's something maybe to consider when booking a venue for an event? Maybe Liz and Sarah, you have some insight to this, but how, talking about when you're first planning an event or even scoping out venues, what to ask, what to look for.
I can jump into that one. So the venues that I tend to work on are bigger. I'm talking about like big major convention centers. So we're booking those out 5-10 years in advance, and we're signing contracts way in advance. And what we do is, as a part of our RFP process, is we have a list of sustainability questions, and we just ensure that we are partnering with venues and cities that are aligned with our clients' goals and objectives and kind of their values. So looking at, does this venue have a solar array? If so, does it meet a certain minimum criteria? Does this venue obviously have a recycling program? But really not does the venue have the recycling program, but does the city or the municipality around it have a recycling program robust enough to support what our needs are? I know that recycling is a big topic we may or may not get too far into today. But that would be something that we would certainly look at. And also just looking at, is the building, what kind of certifications does the building have? And also looking at the city. I will go to a convention center and I will bring 20,000 people from across the country or, the world to a city, bring 20,000 people into that city. They all need housing. What kind of transportation options do I have to get people from 50 plus hotels to the convention center? Ideally, we're using public transportation or we're walking, but that definitely weighs heavily on our decision on what cities we go to bring these types of events to.
Thanks, Sarah. Liz, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, you can apply that same concept to any size of event. I know I haven't yet planned a conference. I hope to someday in my life. But no matter what size you're doing, coming to the venue with all of your ducks in a row as much as possible is going to be the first step to ensuring that they're going to be or have the flexibility to work with you on all of your standards and your event guidelines. And making sure that you're going to be able to stick to that is going to be key. So having that ready to go, like a list of your must-haves, whether it's some for us or like no single-use plastic on site. Does the venue provide organic waste collection and recycling? If not, can we bring it in? Plant-forward or plant-based food options on site. If they don't have that, will they allow us to bring outside vendors in? is there a bar that you're going to be using from that venue? That's been one of our biggest struggles, is if the venue insists on using single-use plastic cups for their bar service, I won't use them as a venue if they won't allow me to bring in our own glassware. So just knowing your lines and what you are not willing to bend on, which hopefully is all of your sustainability initiatives, and finding the venue that will be flexible right up front so that you don't have to go through any other processes with them and RFPs and back and forth and wasting any time. So you can find the venue that is truly going to be the easiest and the best to work with. And looking for those building certifications in advance, you can often find a lot of that information online. If it's a LEED certified or has solar, or if they have a sustainability page on their website, there's a good chance that they've already thought about a lot of these pieces and may be a little bit easier to work with your standards for your event.
I think this might be a good follow-up question for Liz, but is there a checklist that you use when planning an event, which might be helpful for all of us if you have a resource?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my checklist grows with every event that I organize because they're all different sizes, different styles, community, internal. There's all kinds of events. Glad you brought that up. It's not something that I have available yet, but our organization, Sustainability is Sexy, one of our projects we're working on right now is to create event guides and manuals for all styles of events with checklists and resources and information, instead of us having to go to Google and say, how do I do a sustainable event? Because every single event is different, every local community and city is different. We really want to be a resource for that. That's one of our biggest goals and passions, is to lower waste in the events industry, because events are this amazing and important community building, economy building, part of our lives, and personal events like weddings and baby showers and anything that we're doing, we want to be able to provide resources for being zero waste. So going back to what I said a couple questions ago, is making my own personal checklist that we already probably all utilize when creating an event. It's just incorporating some extra lines and extra check marks for those sustainability aspects that you want to start incorporating into your events, and realizing that it's probably not all going to happen at once. If you have the budget and the resources to do that, please do. But most of us are going to have to start with pieces of our events over time, creating more sustainable aspects in the food space, in the promotional space, and eventually getting to achieve our goals with sustainability. So yeah, checklists coming soon, but use the internet and all these amazing people here as resources for questions, and then please do keep an eye out for our event guides and manuals.
Thank you, Liz.
Just really quickly, just to piggyback on what you had just said, I think creating a sustainable event is something that happens over time. It doesn't just happen overnight. It may not be your next event is going to be sustainable, but being able to capture data along the way is also super important. So you can see your event from year after year or quarter after quarter, however often you repeat this event, if it's repeatable. Seeing your improvements along the way is also a great case study to any kind of financial supporters that you may have, or any kind of stakeholders that you have, is being able to benchmark and seeing how you are improving over time.
One final comment is, when I first heard we were going to put this on, I said, well, are there any sustainability event checklists online? And I did sustainability event checklist on Google, and found 3 out of the first 10 responses that were really excellent. I actually dropped them into our event planning for this. So they are out there, and each of the 3 lists that I pulled out had different advice. I mean, they all cover different things. Like you were saying, there's different things that you consider if you were planning a wedding in a vineyard. I keep thinking that because I keep looking at Shane's backyard and it's a vineyard. Very different checklist of events if you're having a wedding in a vineyard versus you're having a concert at a gigantic venue. So look at these different ones, because you can pick and choose, and eventually, like Sarah said, Liz said, you'll have your own checklist in the future to refer to.
The other thing I'd like to add to that too is if you're having maybe a smaller event, or another organization might have a quantity of something, you can borrow from a fellow organization or see what might be out there in the community. I know we had a small event in EcoSlow, and I just reached out to some of my nonprofit colleagues about coffee carafe. Like, we didn't have one, but I'm like, someone's got to have one that we can borrow. So just thinking about that too, and that takes a little bit more time to coordinate, right? It takes a little bit more time to do that, then go out to the store and buy a brand new one. So, yeah, I just wanted to bring that up as well. So maybe we dive into the question a little bit about recycling. Where can we look to learn what is recyclable, what goes in the garbage, what do we compost, what's green waste, or how can we generally kind of reduce the product use and the purchasing that we're doing that would go into those kind of 3 containers. And we know that it changes a lot and can be really confusing, but I thought it would be a good question to ask our panelists of where do we look for this stuff if it is changing and it's confusing?
So you guys can check online in San Luis Obispo County Integrated Waste Management Authority. They've got a whole page on everything that's recyclable and what's not, and also compostable, what should be sent to the landfill. There's some rules of thumb that are kind of in practice. Like, for example, this is a seaweed package container. If it's gonna wrap around your wrist, then that typically means it's not gonna be able to be recycled. So there's that, and then on the bottom of every single plastic item in the United States, it's a federal law to have a number 1 through 7, and that number distinguishes which type of plastic it is. So we'll dive more into that when I host the sustainability show in just a bit, but every single piece of plastic has a number on the bottom, and that'll tell you what type of plastic it's made of, and then based on that number, you can tell if it's easily recycled, which like number 1 and 2, and then not so easy to recycle, which is 3 through 7.
I'll just follow up on that, because this is my field, actually. I've been recycling for 20 minutes. I'm sorry, I'm just getting 5 minutes over there, 20 years. There are only a couple of things that can be recycled. Glass and metal can be recycled infinitely. Plastic and cardboard and paper can be downcycled a couple of times. So recycling isn't that great of a thing to do. With glass and metal, yes, but with plastic, cardboard, and paper, yeah, you can recycle it as a feel-good action, but it's not actually that good for the environment. So, and plastics, the only thing that's recyclable in SLO County are narrow-necked plastics. You do not have to turn it over and look at the bottom. If it's not, doesn't have a narrow neck, it's not recyclable here in SLO County. And that's because that coat on the bottom is what the plastic started as, not what it is now. It's the resin that went into it, not what it is now. So a 1 yogurt container is different from a 1 plastic bottle. So that's why you can't use those resin coats. They're not recycling coats, they're resin coats. Narrow-necked, recyclable.
So just to clarify with that really quick, and then I'll turn it over to you, Sarah, but the 1 through 7 on the plastics is a coding system, almost of a marketing system. It does not guarantee that the product is recyclable. Okay, Sarah, did you want to share anything?
I was just gonna say, for me personally, recycling is so confusing, and it changes in every city, every state, every county that you're in. It's always different. Just because you can recycle it here doesn't mean you can recycle it there. The practice that we really try and dive deep into is hopefully minimizing the amount of recycling and focusing on what we can reuse. That's really where we focus our energy, and that is all part of the planning, and that goes way before you ever get on site. It's looking at how you can reuse everything that you're bringing there on site.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna, kind of the similar thing that I wanted to just re-say, because I think it's so important, is just, it's a mind shift change, it's a behavioral change. Taking into account, like, do you actually need these items, instead of trying to think, well, can I divert an alternative to recycling? Can I divert an alternative into compost and turn that into a resource? Ideally, we'd see a massive reduction in anything that needs to be in the bins in the first place. So reuse, or even getting rid of some of the elements that may no longer be necessary, will help you to avoid having to answer a lot of these questions in the first place, and avoid that extra confusion. And then the alternatives that you do have to find a place for, landfills are your very, very, very last option. Check your local hauler and city for information on recycling, and then organics waste collection, dependent on where you are. In California, will either something you already have access to, or will very soon have access to on a city level. So keeping stuff out of all 3 bins is the best thing possible.
Reduce and reuse are where to start. And then in regards to materials, really thinking about glass and metal because they are basically infinitely recyclable. A glass can become a glass over and over and over again. So just to kind of reiterate your point, Anastasia, I think that's something that isn't communicated to us and is can be new information for people.
Yeah. And I think, you know, growing up we hear reduce, reuse, recycle in that order. And now what I'm seeing a lot is refuse. Like, let's start with refuse. And then we reduce, reuse, recycle. And as a final option, it's rot. It's going to the landfill. That's where it's gonna end up.
I've also heard rethink and replan as well. So you just like, that's why we're here today, right? We're rethinking or replanning how we are not gonna use these items that are recyclable.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Do we have time for one more question? Yes, before we move into the quiz. We're gonna have a Sustainable Shane is gonna lead us into a fun activity. So what are the biggest lessons you've learned when incorporating sustainability into everyday practices?
I can go. I guess the biggest lesson I have learned is in my industry, I have my own personal passion towards sustainability. It wasn't a part of my job. It wasn't a part of my client's ask. It was just my own personal agenda. And through the years, I have been able to push that personal agenda to make major changes in our industry and in our programs that we do. So I think, and without it costing very, very little to the budget. So I think that you can make a change, you can do it without having major budget impacts, and you can do it just because it's simply the right thing to do, not because you're being told or expected to do it.
I would say that it may seem hard because new things almost always seem hard. But that's why we're saying that you don't have to get it perfectly right the first time. I know we had an event at in Cal Poly a few years ago, like a big retirement celebration that we have in December every year. And somebody said, "Oh, I ordered compostable silverware, you know, because I'm trying to be green." You know, I was like, "That's great." And there it arrives, and it's Amazon compostable, and it's not actually compostable. It's plastic with biodegradable things mixed in, so that it will biodegrade into smaller pieces of plastic, which is the worst thing you can possibly get. So it's going to landfill. So we couldn't compost it. So the following year, I was like, we need to have reusable silverware. Even if we're using paper plates and they're going to go to the landfill, we need reusable silverware. So I worked with Janine at Tableware Share, borrowed enough silverware, and had to take it home afterward and wash it in my dishwasher because during COVID we didn't have access to the commercial dishwashers on campus. So that was really a lot of work. But the next year, like I ordered the right quantity and everything went smoother, and it was like, yeah, I still had to wash it, but I had a system now. I had gotten a bunch of these little things that stand up like commercial dishwashers use. So like every year when you're doing these things, or every event that we do, it gets easier. It may seem hard the first time, and then you feel so awesome. And I'll tell you, going to an event where you have real nice forks and spoons rather than that chintzy plastic stuff, you're just like, oh, I can cut this because I have a knife.
Before Liz or Shane chimes in, one thing I like to think about, if anyone's a fan of Brene Brown, one of her podcasts, it was the first one, the first release, but she talks about first time through, FTTs, and that it's so hard the first time, or it can be, because you're doing it for the very first time, but it gets easier the next time. And once you've incorporated something, you have the thing, you know how to resource the thing. So she wasn't even talking about it in relation to sustainability, but I felt like it was such a good fit, and that's a mindset that myself and my team at EcoSlow keep in mind too, is it's the first time through, we know it's just gonna be a little bit harder, so we gotta give ourselves a little bit more grace and patience as we go through it. Before we jump into the quiz, Liz or Shane, anything else you wanted to add to that question?
I'll throw in something real quick. Just that, so I spent my whole life basically educating people on why they should become more sustainable, and teaching people why they should do something is basically telling them why they should change, right? And people really don't like to change. They need to have a reason why they're gonna change, whether it's economically, health-wise, or maybe a social status. What I've learned is that people are really actually okay with changing if you teach them why, like if you make them inherently feel compelled to make a change. So at your events, If you can inform someone why we're using compostable forks, because it's gonna, we all know why. It's gonna help our planet, it's gonna help our climate, et cetera, et cetera. You just gotta teach, you have to inform people why we're making these changes, and they really they're way more down to make a change if you can inform them why they should. And I've seen it time and time and time again. I already brought it up, bring your own cup. That was a small one, how I talked about plastic waste, and people ended up loving it, and they were chatting about bringing their own cup. So just to teach people why they should change, and they're way more willing to do it.
Nice, thanks.
I did just want to jump in a little bit, reiterate that it's a process. I won't go into that anymore since everyone talked about it. But you'll always encounter new obstacles, but that just means that you get to keep learning and growing. I wanted to talk briefly about compostables. They're having a moment right now, which is both amazing and not so great, because there's a lot of greenwashing happening. There's a lot of PLA and bioplastics out there that are not compostable with pretty much any of our systems. So, I see this time and time again, going to an event that is so excited about implementing new sustainable aspects and using these compostables, and then it's either PLA that can't be put in an organic waste collection on site, or they have great compostable fiber-based materials but don't have organic waste collection on site. So those compostables are going to the landfill and just creating more organic waste anaerobic decomposition and methane and gas emissions from our landfills. So there's learning pieces with everything. So when you're going to make a change, just taking that extra moment to research, does this product actually going to do what I want it to do, or reaching out to somebody in your community that might know a little bit, and making sure that you're buying the right stuff. Because the worst thing is buying 5,000 PLA cups only to realize that it's going to make a negative impact. So just kind of taking that extra step and just being very aware as you're making these alternative changes. That's something we've had to learn as an organization. I've had to learn as a business owner. And then the third piece that has been a really big learning thing for me is sticking to my guns. So sticking to my guidelines, to my standards. When you do that, the right sponsors, the right venues, and the right attendees will come to your event. It can be very scary, especially when you're changing over an event that maybe already has big sponsors, has a following and all this stuff. You can be scared to make these changes, to lose some of those people. Just realizing that the right people will come if you make the changes that you want to make.
Just one quick follow-up. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Especially in some place like SLO, there's all these student volunteers. Like, if this is gonna make more work for you, reach out and ask for help. Reach out and ask for volunteers online, social media, through local clubs, whatever. Because there are people, if they know that you're trying to do the green thing, there are people out there who want to help you do it.
Definitely. Thank you all. So I think we're gonna move into the quiz portion.
Poll! What does sustainability mean to you? So there is no right or wrong answer. This is simply a poll. What does sustainability mean to you? Is it taking care of our planet for future generations? Is it leaving a place better than the way you found it? Maintain the health of our planet for generations to come? Or doing what you can to make sure our planet is healthy? So what does sustainability mean to you? It's healthy. All right, boom. So interesting stuff. We have 38% of us said taking care of our planet for future generations. Next up, doing what you can is 27%. Maintain the health. And then lastly, leaving a place better than the way you found it. So, quiz time. The U.S. Department of Energy recommends turning off your monitor and placing the computer on sleep mode if you are not going to use it for how long? 20 minutes, 45 minutes, 2 hours, or 6 hours? At what point should you turn off your monitor so it can save electricity? All right, so 35 of us today, and yes, it is true, 20 minutes. After just 20 minutes, they recommend you to turn off your monitor. So if you're gonna leave your desk for a while, whether you're at home or you're at the office, or maybe you're at your sustainability event, just click that thing off. It'll save a lot of energy. There's a term called ghost power, I'm pretty sure, and it's basically like all the appliances you have plugged in that you're not using still suck energy, even though they're not turned on. So you can unplug it or you can turn off your monitor. Quiz time. SLO Integrated Waste Management Authority currently recycles only what? We talked about this earlier. What does SLO integrated waste management currently only recycle? So yes, it is D, plastics numbers 1 and plastic number 2. Let's dive into it. So numbers 1 through 7, okay? We talked about that briefly. And in slow, you're only going to recycle rigid plastic bottles with a net, such as milk jugs and plastic bottles. And now I would like to invite our other panelist, who you're an expert in recycling. Could you reiterate to us one more time exactly what slow does with the recycling?
So, like most places, most recycling centers across the whole US, the recycling that's collected, the recyclables that are collected, you're not really recycling when you put something in a container. You're collecting recyclables and you're hoping that someone recycles it. So what happens next is it gets sold on the open market to whoever's going to make something out of that material. So plastics 1 and 2, if they're sold, in big bales, they're baled and flattened, and they're mostly shipped to China and other places that spin them into acrylic thread, which then goes to make fleece. So then that's downcycled. They're not made back into bottles again. They're made into, or sometimes you'll get, at events, you'll get bags, like shopping bags that are made of reused bottles, so that's cool, because then you have a reusable bag. But again, that's downcycled. It's not really recycled. It's downcycled into something that can be used one more time before it winds up in a landfill.
Thank you. Yes, I know you're the expert, so I appreciate you chiming in there. Downcycling, upcycling, I think the biggest thing to take home from this is we just want to rethink or refuse or reuse so we don't even need to recycle in the first place, okay? So that's the biggest thing we want to take home. Thank you very much. All right, continuing. True or false, making sustainable life choices has to be expensive. You tell me, true or false? Boom, people are firing in real quick, I love it. 20 seconds. Is it expensive to make sustainable life choices? No, of course not. That's why we're here. We're talking about why it doesn't have to be expensive.
What a fun and interactive way to talk about sustainability and learn about things. So engaging. Thank you, Shane. I think we are now going to open it up to all of you and everyone in the chat. If you have questions for our panel, please either put them in the chat if you're on Zoom, or you can raise your hand nice and high and we will get that microphone to you. We've got a question up front here from Barry. We want to try tossing it. There we go. It's light, it's not heavy. What's your question, Barry?
Yeah, my question is actually something that was said in the introduction by the city about the $4,000 grant.
Yes.
And I would like to know, what about the possibility of using that grant, and I would match it with a $4,000 no interest loan to somebody who wants to build a trailer to basically provide washable plateware, silverware at large events. And then the city could actually make that a requirement for events like, our Earth Day event in Laguna Park. It was required to have the bike valet. How about requiring that vendors use reusable plates instead of throwaway single service? And then you can have a service in town that provides the washable menu for the place. So I'd be game for a $4,000 matching loan if the grant could be made available for that.
Okay, great. Thanks for putting that idea out there, and I'm sure you could contact the city. I think having something that's reusable washing station would be really helpful at events, definitely. Okay. Are there any other questions from our audience? Yes. Yep, we're gonna make sure you're on the mic so everyone can hear.
What if you have a venue or you are inviting clients to attend an event? How successful are you requiring them that your clients follow your established sustainable practices?
So you are a venue and say someone's coming to you with a checklist or not, how can you uphold your
Are you
principles?
successful telling your clients, we do not allow you to use plastic tableware or single-use products?
Does anyone have experience with that?
I can definitely jump in on a little bit of this, and I think there's a couple ways to look at it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about understanding the question, but I think as an event organizer, talking to my vendors and then my attendees about these standards and these guidelines, it's a mixed bag on success. Being as transparent and clear as possible, vendors are going to be your biggest opportunity because most likely they're going to be providing a lot of those elements to attendees, and so making sure that they're following your guidelines. I had experience, we've had a lot of experience in the last year or so, like planning a lot of larger community events, and it started, the first couple, our vendors, a couple of them didn't listen to what we allowed and didn't allow, and we did not basically either at our first event that we did or by the second one, we made it very clear that if you bring this on site and plan to use it, we will not allow you to vend. So you can make the changes, and then being very clear, one thing that's really helped us is making them understand that the reasons that we're doing this, and we're here to help. So let us talk through any obstacles that you think you're going to have in adhering to these standards and these guidelines that we are forcing you to do, and they all want to do it, but there definitely, when it comes to food and beverage especially, there are a lot of obstacles, whether it be cost or finding the right materials or not understanding what they can use. We're here to help, and we're here to hold their hand and give them resources for all of these. Oftentimes at our events, we'll attempt to provide them, work with local organizations that have the products that we want to utilize, and see if we can come up with something to provide them for our vendors and our attendees. And then in regards to stuff like what Shane was talking about, asking people to bring their own reusable water bottle. When you're asking attendees to do something, it's a lot harder, but your opportunity is going to be the biggest when you're working with your vendors and making sure that you're sticking to them. I attended a massive event this weekend. They provided us with a ton of guidelines for vendors. As I walked around, I saw a large amount of vendors not adhering to those guidelines, and none of the organizers stopping what was happening. And so that just shows them, those vendors, that they don't have to adhere to these guidelines and they'll be able to come back. So just being strict with your vendors and then encouraging your attendees to follow as much as possible is what we've experienced.
Yeah, let me chime in on this really quick. I was going to say too, the impacts of hauling trash out. If there's a lot of waste being collected, maybe that's something you just take on as a venue and you haven't thought of, and maybe that's passed on to the person that coming at your space or not, but there's things to look at too, kind of economics, to see can something be shifted.
What I was going to say is, it doesn't help to make a law or a rule that no one can pass because there isn't the infrastructure supporting it. So before you decide you can't do anything with this, you can't bring any disposables, you need to make sure that there is local availability for everything, and then maybe supply that as part of the paperwork. And the other thing is to back whatever you're doing up with either like 1, 2, or 3 strikes law or zero tolerance. And if you're going to do zero tolerance, one way to do that is they have to put a deposit down. And if they're caught breaking the rule, like it's $500. And it's good to make the deposit the amount that they would have to pay to rent the dishware that they would need, you know? So like, if you don't rent the dishware, you're gonna be out this $500 anyway. So, so make a deposit and say, you forfeit this deposit if you don't follow our sustainability rules. So that's a possibility. It's like an enterprise rent-a-car, they charge you $500 on your credit card, and as long as you bring the car back without damaging it, you get your $500 back. The charge doesn't actually go through. But if you make that clear that there's financial, that's the carrot and the stick approach always helps.
And we could probably talk about specifically your case, but for us, for me as an event organizer, it's written into our contracts with our vendors and with our sponsors that are coming on site. If there's any kind of expectation that we have, it's communicated far in advance, and it's just a part of the contract. And if they were to break it, which luckily we don't really have a problem with them breaking that, they just would not be invited back.
It could be looking at your event, what's one thing that you can start with? What's one thing you can change in your contract? Is it cups or plates or garbage? It doesn't have to be the whole dozen or 2 dozen things. It's what's available here, what could make a change, what's doable for your space. Start with that one thing, see how it goes over. There's not a ton of pushback. Maybe try something the next year when you have events. So, but I'm sure anyone after this would be happy to talk to you about your unique situation too. I think we have time for one last question. Anyone else from the audience? Go ahead, Amy.
Shane, you briefly mentioned about kind of a carbon offset type of with your transaction card, and I'm wondering what your experience is with offsets. If it's better to have kind of a voluntary additional donation, or do you fold it into the price of an event, or kind of keep it for people to manage individually?
That's a fantastic question, and I'm going to preload it by saying offsetting is not the solution, just like how recycling is also not the solution. We can't offset ourselves out of this planet. But it is a rung on the ladder on the way to like being super sustainable. Okay, so then now if you're going to get people to engage in the offset, I use an app personally that's linked to my debit card. So if you're at an event, I have to get a little bit more creative on how exactly you could work in offsetting. Maybe through a scannable QR code, or a good tangible one is like a volunteer sign-up form for planting trees or doing something along that line. And then I see some people in the chat right now, they're asking me for what app. Yes, thank you, Liz. It is Earthly app. There's a multitude of apps that you can use to offset your CO2 emissions. Message me though, ma'am, whoever asked me that question, and I'll brain blast some ways, and I'll think about great ways to implement offsetting while at your event.
I'm going to do a little shameless plug for our nonprofit community, but there are many environmentally focused nonprofits in the area, including EcoSlow, including the Land Conservancy, and we talked about sourcing food and supplies locally. You could also look to what are the local nonprofits in this area. Could you write in the contract that an offset to this event, we're going to make a donation to this nonprofit to help further their program. Locally at EcoSlow, we're planting trees, but Land Conservancy is preserving land. Bikeslow County is promoting different transportation. So there's lots of nonprofits, and maybe that's a more community-focused offset that you would consider with your events, and something that maybe your attendees might appreciate too.
Yes, I was actually going to chime in and say something really similar to that, Mary. Something we do with our events is both our vendor fees, we split usually in half for the organizer or the partnering venue, and then the other half goes directly to either our sustainable nonprofit or another local sustainable nonprofit that's aligned with whatever style of event that we're doing, that's here in our local community, and that attendees and vendors can know that part of their money that's going to this event is going to go directly to solutions in the community as well, and that is a way of offsetting. There are also absolutely opportunities to offset in a similar way to your personal finances with an app. There are organizations that offer event offsets for large scale conferences and things like that, and maybe Sarah, you may have some resources on that specifically for large scale events, but all of those types of things are definitely out there, but keeping a local community is a really great way, especially for community style events, to really get people thinking about what they can. So ticket prices, splitting those, vendor fees, splitting those, or giving them to a local nonprofit.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, panel. Thank you, attendees, for being here. We really, really appreciate it. We're a little over time, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. If there is a quick, 10, 15 second thing that our panelists would like to leave you with today, I want to make sure if there's something you want to throw out there that wasn't covered today, we give space for that. Go ahead, Anastasia.
So we're all having an effect on the planet, each and every one of us. Some people think they can't do anything, but we all are part of the solution. We're all part of the problem, we can all be part of the solution. And what you said earlier, Mary, about we don't need one or two people up here saying we can do it perfectly, look at us. We're all imperfect. I still buy chips in those bags that can't be recycled. So whatever you do is a good start, and there's always room for improvement.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, you already started. Coming here today was the first step, and first step a lot of times is the hardest. So from here, you know, there's only the forward motion. Little steps, continuous little steps make a big difference, and you guys are already on that journey, so thank you.
Liz or Shane, anything to add?
Yes, sustainability. It's linked to mental health, physical health, your wallet, and our planet. So just take that into consideration. Mental health is wealth, and sustainability is going to bring you onto that journey.
And my 2 cents is just everything that everyone already said about it is a process, it's not all or nothing. And just looking at it both from an event standpoint, an organization, a business, and a personal standpoint, this is an opportunity. Thank you to the Slow Chamber and everyone involved in this event for creating this first step for a lot of people, but this is an amazing opportunity that we have to learn for ourselves and educate the people that we may impact through our events. So thank you for all being here. It's a really great first step.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to her.
Thank you for hosting us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here today and just sharing all of the good information and questions. I hope everyone's feeling, motivated, inspired, or at least the first step you want to take. I hope you also feel this sense of urgency and necessity to be part of taking better care of our community, of nature, and our planet.